Well, thank you for inviting me to the Chamber Luncheon. As Samantha said, my name is Dorothy Gray. And one of the first things people wonder about, how is a person with the last name Gray affiliated with the Russian Orthodox Church? Well, that's my, my birth name, but my maternal grandparents were immigrants from what is now Slovakia. So when they came to this country, they were already baptized and members of the Orthodox Church. And I, like most kids, went to church with my mom and my grandparents. And when I moved to Kenai 45 years ago, this was a natural place for me to come to the origins of the Orthodox religion here in Alaska. You'll have to forgive me, my voice is a little scratchy today. I'm not sure why, but I have some water here. I do have water, thanks. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history and the background history of the National Historic Landmark here in Kenai. And I moved to Kenai, Soldotna, 45 years ago to teach school. I spent 17 years in 7th grade and moved on, eventually became the staff development director of the school district and retired from that and then started teaching online courses for UAA back when online was just pretty much a correspondence course. Just retired from there about 5 years ago. So being a veteran educator, I feel compelled to ask you folks some quiz questions periodically during my presentation today. But I do have some door prizes today, and I decided to choose some cookbooks, Alaskan cookbooks. So if you answer the question correctly, then you can come up and pick the book that you would like. Most people recognize this, the Holy Assumption of the Virgin Mary Orthodox Church in Old Town Kenai. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about, give you some background information. Because a lot of people wonder, how did Russian Orthodoxy get to Kenai? And in the 1700s, you probably might remember the Danish explorer Vitus Bering sailed across what is now the Bering Sea. And there was a second expedition, and all of these expeditions reported back to Mother Russia about the number of fur seals and sea otters and even the sea cow, which is now extinct. And these reports led a stream of merchants to come to Alaska to make money. And since I am a teacher, I do have some show and tell items too. I don't know, we used to have a sea otter in the, here, is it still here somewhere? There's a sea otter coat in the museum, I saw that, but if you've never felt sea otter fur, I'll pass this around. That's a little sea otter pouch. And this is a sea otter bracelet that a friend of mine made for me in Anchorage. It's super soft. And sea otters have some unusual characteristics. One of them is that they have the most dense fur of any sea mammal. Supposedly, they have 1,000 hairs per square inch. So when the explorers and the merchants came back from Russia, some water here, whoops, wrong microphone. They started colonizing different parts of Alaska. And in school, you probably remember if you went to school here, this is our map of Alaska. And as the Russians came across, this is the Aleutian chain here, and they started out in Attu Island. And soon, Chinese merchants were paying premium prices for these sea otter pelts. And that's when the fur boom began in Alaska. The Russian fur traders could go back, sell their furs to China, and they would make a fortune. The first fur traders that came here on Cook Inlet were in the region, not Kenai, but in around 1780. And it was kind of like, oh, our marathon guys left. It was kind of like the oil companies back in the day, because there were many, many different fur trading companies all competing with each other, kind of like the oil companies today. But in 1794, 95, the first fur traders established a trading post on the bluff above the Kenai River. And if you look at this picture, you can imagine standing here where the walkway is going down. And the little, the ship that came up, St. George the Victorious, came up, and the mouth of the Kenai River is to the left. And high on the bluff, they thought this is a perfect place for a trading post, because they could see both the inlet both ways, and they could look upriver to where the Dena'ina people had their village about a quarter mile upriver, approximately where the Kenai Senior Center is today. And what the fur traders would do, and you'll notice I call them fur traders, not fur hunters. They didn't actually go out and get the furs. They traded with the Dena'ina people here for the furs. And here's my other show and tell item. What they would do for each sea otter pelt, they would give one trade bead. These are called Russian blues. I bought them at the Baranoff Museum in Kodiak. And so one sea otter pelt, and they would get one trade bead. Those trade beads, incidentally, were probably made where my grandparents and my ancestors came from, in what used to be Czechoslovakia, Slovakia, Czech Republic, very famous for beads. Simply tubes of glass that were faceted, chopped up, but to the Dena'ina people, it was something unusual they had not seen before. They loved the beads. And so each sea otter pelt brought one trade bead. But eventually, here in Kenai, the people saw that the Russians had a lot of other things besides that they wanted to have, not just one trade bead. And they kept trying to barter with the foreman of the company here in Kenai. But he was a particularly ruthless man. And he eventually just said to them, no, I'm not going to give you any more. But so in retaliation, the Dena'ina men said, fine, we're not going to go out and get any more sea otter pelts. Eventually, this kept escalating to the point where the foreman of the company here in Kenai resorted to kidnapping women and children and holding them hostage until the men went out to ransom, get their families back. Eventually, this blew up into a really big altercation, which is sometimes referred to as Battle of Kenai. It was memorialized in a show, a play by, if you remember, some of people my age, Lance Peterson. It was called maybe it was the Battle of Kenai, I think, and a play, a musical. Grigory Shelikov was the first governor of Russia, America, and he kept hearing reports about what these fur traders were doing, being physically abusive to the native people. And he went back to Russia and reported to Catherine the Great, who was the empress at that time. And they agreed that they should send some missionaries to Alaska, because they knew that these men, who were the fur traders, would start paying attention if a priest was around. So they got 8 monks to leave St. Petersburg, which is on the far northwestern border of Russia. And it took them almost a year, 293 days, to get all the way across over to, I believe they departed off the Kamchatka Peninsula and arrived in Kodiak and started the Kodiak mission. And today it's considered to be the longest missionary journey of any Orthodox church. anywhere. And several priests started schools. Father Herman started a school in Kodiak. Father Juvenali introduced Christianity to the Dena'ina people. And here in Kenai, a priest monk, Father Igumen Nikolai, arrived here in Kenai in 1845. And his territory was not just Kenai. It was the entire Kenai Peninsula, even as far north as present-day Eklutna, and as far east as present-day Valdez. It took him 2 years to get all the way around to visit the 22 mainly coastal villages that existed at that time. And during that time period, if you can see this, around 1835, 1840, smallpox decimated the population here, not only just here on the Kenai Peninsula, but throughout Alaska, and killing between 1/4 and 2/3 of the Alaska Native people in the villages. It was particularly fatal to children under 2. Consequently, those children never grew up, had families, and helped keep the population stable. So when Father Nikolai got back from his first tour around the peninsula, he designated his helper, a man by the name of Makari Ivanov. And if you've lived in Kenai a while, you might recognize that name. The Ivanov family still lives here, some of them, and they are members of our church. I'll back up here a second, because I love to tell this part when I talk to children. When Father Nikolai had to send to St. Petersburg for vaccine, it wasn't like going to Amazon, and getting it at your house the next day. They had to write a letter. It had to go on a ship off the bluff of Kenai, down Cook Inlet, around, and then it hit the shores of Russia and had to go across 10 time zones. It took, just like it took the monks so long to get here. But Makari Ivanov, he took the vaccine around to the survivors here on the Kenai Peninsula. And in the priest journals, which they were required to keep, and they wrote that most of the people here, the Dena'ina people, accepted the vaccine. In other parts of Alaska, they were somewhat hesitant about taking white people's medicine. But here in the priest journals, it was accepted. Incidentally, during World War II, when Alaska was threatened with Japanese invasion, all of the priest journals, the Russian Orthodox priest journals, starting in 1794, were taken from Alaska, and they are currently in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. We have access to them through microfilm on the University of Alaska archives. So Father Nikolai established a school that he called the Igumen School in his home, and he died the same year that Alaska was purchased, in 1867. And the little chapel that you see there was constructed in 1906, a few years later, over the graves of both Father Nikolai and Makari Ivanov. There's a third person there whose identity has never been known. And you can kind of see the parts of the fence there. This coming summer, we are going to replace the fence. So if any of you out there are fence builders or know of anybody, we want to replace that white picket fence. It's in pretty tough shape and kind of just falling down. I think it's time for a quick quiz question here. How many National Historic Landmarks do you think there are in Alaska? How many in the whole state? You only get one guess, so just shout it out or raise your hand or something. How many in the whole state of Alaska? Come on, be brave.
200. 1.
What did you say? 52. You're very close. We'll let you be the winner. There are exactly 50. Yeah, exactly 50. And our Kenai church and the surrounding buildings is one of the 50. So come on up here and pick your prize here. When I was just walking through the museum, this photo is displayed here in the Kenai Museum. Another priest, after Father Nikolai passed away, decided to reopen the school and continue with the helper of, the son of the helper of Father Nikolai, who was Alexis Ivanov. And records show that Alexis began teaching English to the Kenai children at this time when Alaska was officially a U.S. territory. A question that often gets asked is, why didn't they teach the Dena'ina language? Now, I was an English teacher, and it totally shocked me when I came here to find out that the Dena'ina language here in Kenai had never been written down until 1970, the year I graduated from college. And that was Peter Kalifornsky and a linguist from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, James Curry. They put down the alphabet, wrote a couple of books, and captured some of the stories of the Dena'ina people. So schooling was very important for the Russian Orthodox priests to help the children in their areas, wherever they were, here in Kenai. On that, I don't have a little laser pointer, but you might see the little bell up there at the top. The bell is here in the museum too. But interesting story about that is when I think on my next slide, this is Fort Kenai today. When the old schoolhouse was taken down, the bell mysteriously disappeared. And only, I think I have an article from the Clarion or the Chachaco News or something, about 20 years ago. I don't know, maybe you have that in your records at the museum, but somebody anonymously returned that bell to the museum here. They didn't want to have their name, but somehow that bell, the church bell, was returned here. It's got a great big crack in it now. Today, the Fort Kenai building, which was constructed originally in 1869 by the U.S. Army, was a series of barracks. And a little more information on here, the soldiers stationed in Kenai, some of them were veterans of the Civil War. They came here. It's sitting on approximately the site of where the original Russian fort was, and then the Russian schoolhouse. And here's my next quiz question. When the American soldiers came here in 1869, one of their first jobs was to conduct a census. How many people do you think lived in Kenai in 1869? Remember, you get one guess. Whoops. Less than 500. Less than 2,000. Less than 300. 200. Less than 200. Well, you got one digit right. There's a 4 in it.
40.
You're real. We're gonna award you the prize. Oh, okay. Okay. There were 44 people left on the census. Very, very, very sad. The church today is our church hall. Originally, though, when it was first rebuilt for the bicentennial, it was the museum was upstairs, and the downstairs became the senior center, and it has a commercial kitchen in there. And then when this building was built, the city reverted the ownership of the building back to the church. So it's used as our church hall and our Sunday school for the parish today. The parish house is also part of the National Historic Landmark. This house is believed to be the oldest inhabited building on the Kenai Peninsula. It was constructed in 1881. There were 3 rectories with this same architectural design in Alaska. This is the only one still standing. About 25 years ago, it was completely restored. It was originally built on a dirt floor like most log cabins. It was lifted up and slid into the backyard. And then excavators came, dug out a full basement and increased the living space of the house. They gutted the whole house and installed new plumbing, new electricity, and the house was slid back. Well, I guess they did that, the utilities, after they slid it back onto the foundation. And today, this house has been the home of all 13 Russian Orthodox parish priests who served here in Kenai. So I have one more question now. You've already heard me talk about the chapel and the Fort Kenai building and now the rectory, and you saw pictures of the church. How many acres do you think comprise the entire National Historic Landmark here in Kenai? 180? Oh, 1 acre. Who said 15? Oh, okay. Come on up and Junie, come on up and get your cookbook here, or yeah, I guess they're all cookbooks. Yeah, it's actually just shy of 13 acres, so you're very close, because it also contains the cemetery. And we're going to see a quick picture of that here momentarily. By the way, these signs were erected by the Rotary Club, well, Meryl probably knows, 25 years ago maybe. They're beautiful signs, and they comprise part of the walking tour through Old Town. The architectural drawings of the rectory, the church, and the chapel those two are housed at the U.S. Library of Congress under what's called a HABS. That's an acronym for the Historic Architectural Buildings Survey. So you can see all kinds of, we have some of these in the entryway of the church to see the original designs of these buildings. And now we'll get over to the actual church building itself. When Father Nikolai was alive, he built a small chapel that was part of the original Russian trading post. But over the years, that became rather dilapidated. And according to what I've read, once the church got built where it is now, many people started moving around the church. It was covered with little tiny log cabins all over the place. The 4 cabins that are remaining are now in the Pioneer Park. Is that right, June? Yeah. And the priest at that time decided that Kenai needed a real church. So he petitioned the mother church in St. Petersburg, even though, again, this was on U.S. territory. The church still had all its spiritual ties to Russia. And they, in 1894, they appropriated $400 to build this building. Dean can probably tell me how far $400 goes today. But we do have in our church archives, we have the copies of hardware receipts, and you can see how much a nail cost. You can see how much tools cost. It's crazy, you think of inflation. Even though the $400 went to items that were not locally available, like glass for the windows. Most of the panes in the church are the original glass from 1894. We now have storm windows protecting them. The construction of the church was a family community affair. Every family that belonged to the church at that time had to contribute 5 hand-hewn logs for its construction. And if you've been inside the church, we have a little peekaboo window, and you can see the logs and the moss in there. Oops, I had to get another drink. Oops. An interesting feature about the church is that its architectural design is in the shape of a boat, which is one of the 3 main designs of Orthodox churches in the world. The boat being symbolic of helping people get through turbulent waters toward heaven. And here, it's a particularly appropriate design because we're a fishing community, still are a fishing community. And if you were to see the architectural drawings of this flat surface, the prow of the boat is behind this wall of icons. And in most Orthodox churches, there's an east-west orientation, like it is here in Kenai. The boat is facing east. And the reason for that is if you go back 2,000 years, after the crucifixion, the Christian church's headquarters was in Constantinople, which is Istanbul, Turkey today. After 1,000 years, there was dissension about wording in the Nicene Creed, infallibility of the Pope, to name 2 of them. And that's when the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church emerged as separate entities. The Catholic Church established its center in Rome, and the Orthodox Church stayed in Constantinople, moved to Greece, and eventually into the Eastern European countries where my grandparents were from. So there's always an East. We say many times our church is referred to as Eastern Orthodoxy, and we call Catholicism Western, the Western side, because you think of the Holy Roman Empire kind of cut in half. So if you look at the doctrines of the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, they're very similar. We have many more similarities than we do differences. People often ask, are you like Lutherans? Well, and I say, we're more like Catholics. If you know the Catholic religion, we're more like Catholicism because of that history, because of those roots. The colors are very symbolic in our church. The blue for the heavens, usually the dome of the church is blue. And every Orthodox church has either red carpeting or at least a red runner going up into the altar, symbolizing the blood of Christ. Even the domes of the church that are sometimes called onion domes, and some people guess that, they were from Russia to make the snow fall off. They're actually the shape of a candle flame, signifying the light of Christ. And our church has 3 domes, representing the Holy Trinity. Some churches have 1, some have 12 for the 12 apostles, all different representations. Our church interior has beautiful icons that date back to one icon that dates back to the middle of the 1700s, and today is considered to be one of the oldest pieces of non-native art in the state of Alaska. It's the practice of Orthodox iconographers never to sign or date their icons. They're done for a spiritual, religious purpose. And their history goes back to the time when very few people could read, and even fewer had books. So the icons told the Bible stories and showed pictures of famous people involved in those Bible stories. And today, you'll see on this first icon here, that's kind of like a church calendar. The icon represents what the upcoming church holiday usually is. This was taken at Easter. That's why it's all decorated with flowers. The chandelier is solid brass, and it's been estimated to weigh 2,000 pounds. It's lit by candlelight. Our new priest kept saying, oh, we should put little, battery-operated candles. No. And it's lit during Christmas, Easter, often during funerals, and always during weddings, because the money to purchase that chandelier is donated by newlywed couples. It's very beautiful when it's lit. Because our church is a National Historic Landmark, we have access to many different kinds of funding sources and grants. One allowed this church to be the first first Orthodox church in the state of Alaska to have a fire suppression system. It's not your old-fashioned sprinkle water all over system. It's a high-pressure mist system that it suppresses the fire by putting heavy mist pushing down from little units on the roof. And because the church was built without any water, it had to have some kind of water source to have the fire suppression system work. So if you've been over there, you see a little gift shop that was built about 7 years ago. The main purpose of the gift shop was not a gift shop. Its main purpose was to provide the mechanism for all the fire suppression system that goes underground through a utilidor into the church. And just a couple quick notes about our church today. We have many people who have converted from other Christian faiths who attend. And our priest is a convert, come to think of it. We invite visitors. Anytime that you have company from out of state in the summertime, we have regularly scheduled tours. Usually we have the folks here at the visitor center know about that, when those are going to be going on. And there are, this might surprise you, but on any given summer day, there may be as many as 300 or 400 people who come through this church, or walk by it and take photos, or walk over to the chapel and take photos. It's highlighted in most of the travel magazines. And what else was I going to say? It's the architecture is so beautiful on the inside and the out. The icons, people are very curious to see the icons. And for me, it's a very special place to worship. I often think of, how many people stood in this very spot since 1895, in this church. And for that reason, it's a highly visited place. Here's our little church cemetery, which is really pretty big. I shouldn't say little. And some of the graves date back to the time of the Russian fur traders. You can see people here. It's not quite as manicured as the Kenai City Cemetery. It's much more rustic. And kind of in conclusion here, I just wanted to say that, summarizing why this church became a National Historic Landmark. It became a National Historic Landmark in 1970, and it had to do with many different factors that you've seen here on these slides. First, of course, was introducing Christianity to the people. Second, it was the priests often acting as police or jury to tame down the fur traders. Some of the priests, as you saw, started schools. One item on here that you didn't see, which is dear to my heart, is one of the priests brought vegetables from Siberia that he knew would grow here. and introduced the Dena'ina people into growing potatoes, cabbages, carrots, rutabagas, all those root vegetables. And also they brought tools and taught the men how to build log cabins and dovetail the logs together. So for all those reasons, this became a National Historic Landmark. And here's my very last question. We'll see how good people's memories are. How many National Historic Landmarks are there in Alaska? He was listening. 50. 50. Okay, we'll give you one more quick, I'll give you one more quick question, and I don't know if we have time for a couple of audience questions, I don't know, but how many do you think of the 50, of the 50, how many do you think are actually Russian Orthodox churches? Marion? Okay, I'll give that to you because it's actually 7. Oh, I'm sorry. You said 7. Okay, come on up. There are 7, but the reason is in Kenai, the National Historic Landmark status stretches not only to the church, but to the chapel. They're listed separately, even though they're all part of that 13 acres. And then in Sitka, the same thing, the cathedral and then the bishop's house are listed separately, but they're in the same town. So, do we have a time for a couple quick questions, or are we? Okay. You can quiz me now, Meryl.
The church in Luncheon, how is it historically associated with, did it come after the church in Kenai? How did that come into being?
They're very close in time. I honestly don't know the exact date, but that one has quite a history